ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that a storm is building beneath the surface of Port Charles, and this time it is not driven by chance but by choice, by anger sharpened into intention and grief transformed into something far more dangerous. What begins as a quiet realization quickly mutates into an obsession, as Britt and Jocelyn find themselves standing at the edge of a decision that could redefine not only their own futures, but the fragile balance of power surrounding Jason, Sunny, and the invisible forces tightening around them. The truth about Cullum does not arrive as a revelation alone. It lands like a detonation, tearing through every justification, every lie, every carefully constructed narrative that once allowed them to survive without acting. Knowing that Cullum is the one who destroyed Marco strips away hesitation, and in its place grows something far colder, far more deliberate. Jocelyn is no longer simply reacting to events. She is recalibrating her sense of justice, reshaping it into something that no longer fits within the boundaries she once believed in. There is a shift in her, subtle at first but unmistakable, as the idea of control begins to consume her thinking. The system has failed too many times, allowed too many people to manipulate outcomes and escape consequences, and now she begins to question whether waiting for justice is nothing more than surrender disguised as patience. That internal conflict becomes the fuel that drives her forward, pushing her toward a place where morality is no longer defined by rules but by results. The more she reflects on Jason's sacrifice, the more unbearable it becomes, because his silence is not noble in her eyes anymore. It is a chain that binds everyone else to inaction. Britt, on the other hand, is caught in a far more intricate web of guilt and survival. She understands the cost of lies better than anyone, understands how easily a single decision can spiral into something irreversible. Her role in protecting Jason has already placed her in a position where truth has become a liability, and now the stakes have escalated beyond anything she anticipated. Being assigned to Cullum's care is not coincidence. It feels like a cruel alignment of fate, forcing her to confront the very man who has triggered this entire chain of destruction. Every moment she stands near him in the ICU becomes a test of restraint, a reminder that she holds a power she never asked for but can no longer ignore. The hospital, usually a place of healing, transforms into something far more oppressive, its sterile walls hiding intentions that are anything but clean. Cullum lies there, suspended between vulnerability and threat, and that ambiguity is what makes him so dangerous. Even unconscious, he represents a ticking clock, a loose end that could awaken and dismantle everything. Britt feels the weight of that reality pressing down on her, forcing her to consider options she once would have dismissed without hesitation. The line between doctor and executioner blurs in her mind, not because she wants it to, but because the circumstances leave her no clear path forward. Jocelyn's influence becomes the catalyst that accelerates everything. She does not demand action outright, but the implication is always there, threading through every suggestion, every carefully chosen word. She understands that Britt is already conflicted, already standing on unstable ground, and she leans into that vulnerability, not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. In Jocelyn's mind, this is not about revenge alone. It is about reclaiming agency, about refusing to let another life be destroyed while they stand by and watch. That belief, however, carries a dangerous flaw, because it assumes that control can be maintained once a line is crossed, that consequences can be contained. As their plan begins to take shape, the tension between intention and consequence grows more suffocating. Britt starts to realize that this is no longer just about Jason or Marco, or even Cullum. It is about who they are willing to become in order to survive what is coming. Every step forward feels like a betrayal of something fundamental, yet stepping back feels equally impossible. The pressure builds not from external threats alone, but from within, from the knowledge that once a decision is made, there will be no undoing it. Outside the hospital, the larger game continues to unfold, with Sunny and Sidwell locked in a battle that is as much psychological as it is strategic. The revelation of Cullum's true role has shifted the balance, but it has not simplified the situation. If anything, it has made everything more volatile, more unpredictable. Sunny's determination to protect those he cares about mirrors the choices Britt and Jocelyn are beginning to consider, creating a parallel that underscores just how blurred the lines have become. Everyone believes they are acting out of necessity, yet no one can fully control the fallout of their actions. Lucas, caught in his own emotional turmoil, adds another layer of complexity to the situation. His decision to shield Sidwell, even temporarily, is not rooted in loyalty but in confusion, in the overwhelming need to make sense of a loss that defies logic. That hesitation creates space for manipulation, for truths to be buried just long enough for other plans to take root. In a world where timing is everything, even a moment of doubt can alter the trajectory of events. Back in the ICU, the atmosphere becomes almost unbearable, each second stretching into something heavier, more charged. Britt stands at the center of it all, aware that she is both participant and gatekeeper in a scenario that could spiral out of control at any moment. The machines surrounding Cullum continue their steady rhythm, indifferent to the storm gathering around them, but for Britt, every sound becomes a reminder of what is at stake. Jocelyn's presence lingers in her thoughts, a constant push toward action, toward a decision that would shift everything. What makes the situation truly dangerous is not just the plan itself, but the certainty that begins to form around it. Doubt, once a protective barrier, starts to erode under the weight of anger and fear. The idea that this might be the only way forward becomes more convincing with each passing moment, and that belief is what ultimately threatens to tip everything over the edge. Because once they stop questioning whether they should act, the question becomes how far they are willing to go. And in that shift, something irreversible begins to take shape, something that extends beyond revenge or justice and into the realm of transformation. Britt is no longer just trying to protect herself or Jason. She is confronting the possibility that survival in this world may require becoming something she never intended to be. Jocelyn, meanwhile, steps further into a role that is both empowering and terrifying, driven by a conviction that refuses to acknowledge the cost. The tension reaches a point where silence itself feels like a decision, where doing nothing is no longer neutral but complicit. And as the night deepens around Port Charles, the sense of inevitability grows stronger, as if the city itself is holding its breath, waiting to see whether they will follow through or pull back at the last possible moment. But the truth is already clear beneath the surface. They have gone too far to simply walk away, and whatever comes next will not just be a consequence of their actions, but a reflection of who they have chosen to become. The fragile balance in Port Charles is no longer holding, and what once felt like a scattered series of secrets is now tightening into a single suffocating convergence of rage, grief, and irreversible intent. The death of Marco is no longer just a tragedy lingering in the background. It has become a catalyst, a wound that refuses to close, driving Lucas into a place he never imagined he could reach. His grief does not express itself through quiet mourning, but through a growing, restless need for justice that slowly begins to resemble something darker. At first, he convinces himself that he only wants the truth, only wants accountability, but the moment he learns, truly accepts that Cullum was the one responsible, something shifts in him. The need for justice fractures, splintering into something sharper, more dangerous, something that begins to echo the very violence he claims to despise. What makes Lucas's descent even more unsettling is how seamlessly it intertwines with Britt's own internal collapse. Their connection, once built on shared understanding and fragile trust, begins to evolve into something more intense, more volatile. They recognize in each other the same conflict, the same silent war between restraint and action, and instead of pulling each other back, they begin to reinforce the very impulses they should fear. Britt, already burdened by her role in protecting Jason and her proximity to Cullum in the ICU, finds in Lucas not just an ally but a reflection of her own unraveling. Together they create a dangerous feedback loop, where doubt is gradually replaced by justification, and hesitation is reinterpreted as weakness. Jocelyn's influence still lingers, but the dynamic is no longer solely driven by her urgency. Now, it is Lucas who brings a new kind of intensity into the equation, one rooted not in strategy but in raw, unprocessed grief. He does not want to wait for the system to act, does not want to trust a process that has already failed Marco, and that conviction begins to infect every conversation, every decision. The idea of letting Cullum live, of allowing him even the possibility of escaping consequences again, becomes unbearable. And in that shared mindset, a plan begins to solidify, not fully spoken, not explicitly agreed upon, but undeniably present. Meanwhile, the revelation reaches Sidwell, and it detonates everything he thought he controlled. Learning that Cullum, his own ally, was responsible for Marco's death is not just a betrayal, it is a humiliation, a fracture in his authority that he cannot tolerate. For a man like Sidwell, control is everything, and the realization that someone within his circle acted independently created chaos that now threatens to spiral beyond his reach, ignites a fury that is both calculated and deeply personal. He begins to reassess every alliance, every move, recognizing that the threat is no longer external, but embedded within the very structure he built. This is where the paths begin to converge, not by coincidence, but by inevitability. The ICU becomes more than a setting. It becomes a battleground, disguised as a place of recovery. Cullum lies there, unaware that he is no longer just a patient, but the center of three intersecting motives: Lucas's grief-fueled need for vengeance, Britt's desperate attempt to regain control over a situation that has spiraled beyond her, and Sidwell's ruthless drive to eliminate a liability that has already caused too much damage. Each of them approaches the moment differently, but all are drawn to the same conclusion, each believing their reasoning is justified, necessary, unavoidable. The tension inside the hospital begins to shift in subtle ways. Small changes in routine, in presence, in the unspoken understanding between those who know something is about to happen. Britt feels it most acutely, the weight of her role pressing down on her as she moves through the motions of her profession, while knowing that those motions may soon conceal something far more permanent. Every decision feels magnified, every second stretched thin between what she is supposed to do and what she is being pulled toward doing. Lucas, meanwhile, reaches a point where turning back is no longer an option in his mind. The image of Marco, the unanswered questions, the sense of injustice, it all collapses into a single consuming purpose. What makes his transformation so chilling is not the loss of empathy, but the redirection of it. He convinces himself that what he is about to do is not cruelty but necessity, not revenge but correction. That belief allows him to step into a space he once would have rejected entirely, and once there, the line between who he was and who he is becoming begins to blur beyond recognition. Sidwell's involvement adds a layer of unpredictability that threatens to destabilize everything. Unlike Britt and Lucas, his motivations are not conflicted. They are precise, strategic, and devoid of hesitation. For him, Cullum's existence has become a problem that needs to be solved, a loose end that cannot be allowed to unravel further. But what he does not fully anticipate is that he is no longer the only one targeting that outcome, and that convergence creates a scenario where control becomes impossible to maintain. When the moment finally arrives, it is not explosive in the way one might expect. There is no chaos, no outward spectacle, only a suffocating stillness that makes everything feel even more irreversible. The act itself is less about violence and more about decision, about crossing a boundary that once defined them. And in that crossing, something fundamental changes. Cullum's end is not just the removal of a threat, it is the culmination of everything that has been building, every suppressed emotion, every compromised principle, every justification that led them here. But the aftermath is where the true consequences begin to unfold, because eliminating Cullum does not resolve the chaos he created, it amplifies it. The absence of answers, the disappearance of a key figure, the sudden shift in the balance of power, it all creates a vacuum that demands to be filled. Sidwell, despite achieving his objective, is left with a new problem, the realization that he is no longer the only one capable of making such decisions. Britt and Lucas, in turn, are forced to confront the reality of what they have done, and the understanding that there is no returning to who they were before. The most unsettling aspect of it all is not the act itself, but how inevitable it begins to feel in retrospect. Every step, every choice, every moment of hesitation that was overridden, it all leads here with a kind of quiet logic that makes it impossible to dismiss as a single mistake. This is not an isolated incident, it is a transformation, one that will ripple outward, affecting every relationship, every alliance, every future decision. And as Port Charles continues to move, seemingly unchanged on the surface, the truth lingers beneath it all. The real danger was never just Cullum, but what his existence forced others to become.